They thought their secrets were secured in iron lungs and vaults laced with fingerprints of dead men. But now, the lock is shattered, and the vault is bleeding, not because of a rebellion, but because someone inside the machine finally screamed. And that scream wasn't meant for them. It was aimed at you. Because while they built podiums on lies and swallowed truth like sedatives, something slipped through their sterilized fingers. A crack, a breath, a whisper. And now that whisper is echoing across frequencies they no longer control. Someone didn't just speak. They detonated every damn firewall with a name. Your name, your knowledge, your instinct. You've been watching long enough. You've seen the camera angles. You've memorized the pauses. You know exactly when the light turns red and they start performing. But this time, they didn't get a script. This time, it wasn't theater. It was evidence, raw, live, unforgiving. The audience wasn't meant to hear it. That confession wasn't rehearsed, but it slipped, didn't it? Right through the cracks of a trembling voice, backed into a corner. And that single truth bled out like oil onto fire. It wasn't a malfunction, it wasn't sabotage, it was a rupture, a fracture in the illusion. Someone flinched, someone blinked. And when they did, the whole empire trembled. You felt it. The shift, not in politics, not in policy, but in power. Because now, the power is leaking, and it's pouring toward the very people they trained you to ignore. It's leaking toward you. Because you were never supposed to know how deep it goes. You were never supposed to know who funds the fear, who choreographs the collapse, who edits the footage to sell you safety. But now they don't get to decide what you see. Now their walls are see-through, and the curtains caught fire. They crafted a narrative. You lived through the consequences. They tailored numbers. You counted coffins. They manufactured heroes. You buried them. But today, the illusion didn't just glitch. It bled on live television in real time, with a pulse, with receipts. And you saw the whites of their eyes when the teleprompter froze. You saw the hesitation when the narrative broke rank, because this wasn't a hack, it wasn't a leak, it was an exorcism of the rot, of the guilt, of the buried truths that no press conference could contain. And in that split second, the lie unraveled faster than they could repackage it. You saw it, you felt it, not as a citizen, but as the target they never accounted for. You were never passive. You were watching with a loaded mind, and they knew. Once the first secret broke containment, the rest would follow like bloodhounds, with names tattooed behind their teeth. This wasn't about conspiracy. This was about confirmation. And you felt the shift not in your mind, but in your spine. The hair raised. The room quieted, not because you were shocked, but because everything finally aligned. Patterns you saw months ago. Moves that made no sense. Until now. Now the footage makes sense. Now the contradictions breathe. And now they're scrambling, not to deny, but to distract. Watch closely. They'll offer outrage, manufactured debates, convenient scapegoats. But the truth already escaped the cage, and it's hungry for context, for clarity, for names. They thought the people were too dumb to decode. But you've been decoding since they started lying in high definition. You don't need subtitles. You read body language. You read eye flicks. And what you saw on that broadcast, that wasn't fear of getting caught. That was fear of a reckoning. One they can't vote out. One they can't shut down with a press badge and a threat. They trained you to look the other way. They taught you to mock the whistleblower, to side with the PR machine, to treat truth like a disease and compliance like a cure. But not anymore, because now someone inside couldn't take the weight, and they chose violence. Not with weapons, but with revelation. They lit the fuse inside their own fortress, and the detonation was broadcast in 4K. You saw it, the tension, the breath between syllables, the moment their throat locked up because they knew this was the moment the dam breaks. And now, every hidden memo, every redacted file, every blacklisted fact, it's all crawling back to the surface like it remembers what sunlight tastes like. This is not exposure, this is exhumation. They buried truth. But now it walks, and you were built for this hour. Because you're not confused, you're calibrated. Your rage doesn't wander, it tunnels, it targets, and now your target is visible. It has names, it has affiliations, it has fingerprints. They'll try to deny, to laugh, to smear, but they're bleeding, not metaphorically. Their control. What little of it they thought was unshakable, it's now hanging by threads they no longer own. That broadcast wasn't just a mistake, it was a gateway, and what it let through can't be reversed, because people saw it, people who never questioned, people who once ridiculed you for seeing too clearly. Now they're the ones searching your archives, they're the ones revisiting your warnings, because now it's not theory, it's timeline, it's confession, it's caught red-handed in front of millions. They're scared, and it shows. Their smiles are robotic, their scripts are stiff, their eyes dart too quickly, they're overcorrecting, trying to plug the holes with bigger headlines and louder distractions. But the wound's too deep. You saw it, we all saw it. Not just the words, but the silence between them, the fear behind the pupils. Because when a lie collapses on live television, it's not just a scandal, it's a signal. And that signal is viral. It doesn't need broadcast towers. It needs eyes, it needs ears. And now that you've heard it, you can't unhear it. You can't unknow it. And you damn sure won't unsee the fallout. You've entered a different frequency now. One where the illusion is allergic to scrutiny. One where the puppeteers are twitching, not from power, but from panic. Because they know it's not the leak that destroys an empire. It's the questions that follow. And you have questions. You have receipts. You have instincts that won't sit down just because they're uncomfortable. You're not here to be reassured. You're here to witness, and witnessing is the most dangerous act in a world built on distraction. That's why they fear you. Not because you're loud, but because you're precise. You see what they can't scrub. You catch what they didn't plan. And now their timeline belongs to you. So watch them closely now. Watch how they squirm in polished suits and over-rehearsed apologies. Watch how they backpedal. Watch how they try to erase yesterday's broadcast from every platform, every search result, every mention. But it won't work, because this isn't just digital, it's visceral. The truth they tried to suppress. It branded itself into the minds of everyone tuned in, and now it echoes louder than anything they can fabricate. You've seen the beginning of their unraveling. You're standing on the threshold of their exposure, and what comes next will not be orchestrated by them. It'll be authored by you, because now that the whistle has been blown, the hunt doesn't stop at one broadcast. It begins there, it spreads, it multiplies, and you, who've been preparing in shadows, connecting dots, sensing tremors, you're not just a spectator. You're the continuation of the breach. And what breaks next isn't a machine, it's trust. Not the kind printed on currency or stitched into flags, but the invisible one. The one that held this entire illusion together. And when that kind of trust shatters, the collapse isn't loud. It's surgical. It eats from within. One realization at a time. One headline too perfect. One name too recycled. One narrative too synchronized. And suddenly the crowd that once knelt now narrows its eyes. They start to question what was never meant to be questioned. And questioning, in this context, is a crime. Because in the age of engineered loyalty, independent thought is an act of war, and you have already declared yours. You don't run with slogans anymore. You dissect them. You don't follow the narrative. You track its origin. And when the transmission broke and truth leaked mid-broadcast, you didn't flinch. You listened. Not just to the words, but to the architecture behind them. You felt the scaffolding tremble. You heard the rehearsal fracture. And while millions blinked in confusion, you knew. You always knew this moment would come. That the artificial stability would combust the moment one cog refused to turn. Because they designed the entire structure on obedience. They measured loyalty in silence. They crafted compliance into culture. But what they didn't calculate was you. A variable too sharp to dull. Too observant to gaslight. Too deliberate to distract. You are the equation they failed to solve. The hypothesis they tried to erase from the chalkboard, and now, you're the one holding the chalk. This isn't about politics. This isn't about party lines or tribal masks. This is deeper. This is older. This is about power. How it's dressed. How it's spoken. How it manipulates your sense of permission. And now that you've seen behind the curtain, you understand. The power never lived in their offices. It lived in your unawareness. It lived in your hesitation to look closer. But now, that hesitation has been incinerated. Now you don't just see them, you see through them. Their patterns, once subtle, are now repetitive. The way they seed panic, the way they package saviors, the way they control narratives like thermostats, raising tension when they want obedience, cooling it down when they fear revolt. But today, the dials slipped from their hands, and the temperature is no longer in their control, because people aren't just reacting, they're recalibrating quietly, sharply, strategically, and you're ahead of the recalibration, you're shaping it. They'll try to recover, they'll spin apologies, open panels, create bipartisan scapegoats. But it's not enough, because the damage isn't cosmetic, it's foundational. You can't PR your way out of hemorrhaging credibility. You can't distract from a truth that's now burning across timelines and inboxes and dinner tables. You can't scrub it from the eyes that have already woken up. And worst of all, you can't erase the one who triggered the breach. You've now entered a phase where your attention is weaponized. Every question you ask infects their design. Every insight you share fractures their control. You are not just observing the unraveling, you are accelerating it. Because exposure without strategy is noise. But exposure with intent? That's insurgency. That's what they're feeling now. The difference between a random leak and a coordinated detonation. Make no mistake, this was war long before you knew it. But back then, you were outgunned. Now, you're learning their language. You're deciphering their currency. You're predicting their next move before they even load the script. And you know the telltale signs. The tremble in the voice, the too polished response, the sudden pivot from facts to feelings. These are not strategies. These are symptoms. Symptoms of a collapsing monolith, gasping for legitimacy. They can't sell you the same illusion anymore. Because now you recognize the projection, the edited footage, the planted stories, the buzzwords designed to bypass logic and tug your tribal strings. You don't react. You reverse engineer. You map out the timing. You trace who benefits. You analyze the silence that follows. Because every time a secret leaks, a vacuum forms. And the ones who rush to fill it tell you everything you need to know. This is no longer about a single whistleblower. This is about an infection spreading across the halls of control. You can hear it in their speeches. You can see it in their eyes. The confidence is gone. The control is slipping. The people they mocked for asking questions, now they fear them. Because questions, once contagious, are impossible to contain. You aren't screaming in the streets. You're whispering in rooms that used to echo with obedience. And those whispers, they're evolving into commands. They're scared of your evolution, not the loud, angry, theatrical kind, but the quiet one, the focused one, the one where you don't wait for approval, where you don't look to their scripts for validation, where your clarity becomes more dangerous than their censorship. Because now, you're not just immune to their narrative, you're crafting your own. And that terrifies them. They wanted you reactive, predictable, dependent. But the breach reprogrammed you. It didn't just show you the truth. It rewired how you process truth. Now you don't just absorb information, you interrogate it. You interrogate the source, the funding, the framing, the consequences. You don't just consume media, you deconstruct it. You don't just spot lies, you track their birth. That's what happens after the breach. You become sovereign, mentally armed, psychologically lethal. And that's when their tactics turn desperate. They'll offer distractions packaged as justice. They'll elevate clowns and offer them as thought leaders. They'll manufacture urgency where there is none and bury urgency where it threatens them. But you stay unmoved. Not because you're cynical, but because you've outgrown manipulation. You've stepped into a new frequency, not one dictated by fear or identity or echo chambers, but by focus, precision, strategy. And when you move from that place, you don't need a mob. You become the momentum. Every thought you form is a ripple. Every decision you make is a data point they can't track. Because the breach didn't just expose them, it exposed you to yourself. Now you know what you're capable of. When the illusion collapsed, it wasn't just their house of cards that fell. It was the mental cage they built for you. And when that cage shattered, what emerged wasn't chaos. It was clarity. Clarity doesn't yell, it doesn't beg, it doesn't protest. It builds, it crafts, it restructures. And that's what you're doing now, silently, deliberately. You're watching them claw for relevance while you architect a future with your bare hands and bulletproof perception. You don't argue anymore. You observe. You don't defend your beliefs. You demonstrate them. You don't flinch when they shout. Because you already calculated their volume into your plan. And while they scramble to reinforce the broadcast tower, you've already burned blueprints into the minds of 1,000 others who watched the same moment, who heard the same slip, who felt the same unraveling. They may own the towers, but you own the echo. The whistle wasn't a warning, it was a trigger. And now you're not just watching the bleed, you are tracking it, following it, amplifying it. You are not waiting for part 2 of the broadcast. You are the continuation of exposure. And the moment they thought you'd forget was the moment you started remembering everything. What you're building can't be censored. What you've seen can't be discredited. And what's coming can't be televised. It will be decoded by minds that no longer kneel, by hands that no longer beg, by you, the breach incarnate, the consequence they denied. the ripple that became a reckoning, and the reckoning has a timeline, which begins. Right after this next move, the pulse of the world changes. You can hear it if you stop pretending you can't. It's not a sound, it's a shift. A pressure under the skin of reality. Every broadcast, every redacted report, every slip of the tongue under fluorescent congressional lights. None of it is accidental anymore. These aren't mistakes, these are ruptures. The curtain isn't just being tugged, it's being ripped off the hinges, and the ones who fastened it, those with trembling pens and expensive silence, are now the ones exposed under their own surveillance. The game they designed to play God has now turned its gaze inward, and they don't have the spine for what's coming. Because this is no longer about secrets. This is about consequences. You see, when you operate for too long without resistance, you forget fear. You forget consequence. You mistake control for permanence. But permanence doesn't exist when truth becomes kinetic. And now it has. Not whispered, not theorized, not shoved in footnotes of conspiracy forms, but revealed publicly, viciously, and without pause. They had a timeline. So did we. Theirs was about maintenance. Ours is about collapse. And the collapse has style. It's not chaos. It's precision. It's the slow erosion of their untouchable myth. It's the televised dissection of a narrative they swore could never unravel. But unravel it does, thread by thread, name by name, timestamp by timestamp. Because now the audience isn't asleep. Now the audience is armed, not with weapons, with awareness, with clarity, with questions that can't be laughed off, with timelines that connect instead of confuse, with footage, with documents, with survivors who don't blink anymore when they speak, because they're not afraid of the dark. They've lived in it long enough to map it out by touch. And when a whistle is blown, it's not just sound. It's permission. Permission for those who knew, but stayed quiet, to now step forward. For those who suspected but lacked proof, to now raise their voice. For those who were punished for asking, to now be vindicated. It's no longer fringe. It's no longer funny. It's no longer hidden. It's here. And the beauty of it? It can't be undone. There's no off switch for this kind of exposure. You can't retract a scream once it's echoed across continents. You can't rebury what's already surfaced in the collective psyche. They tried damage control. But the damage isn't something to be controlled. It's something to be answered for. And that is where the reckoning finds its grip. Because now the hunters are the hunted, and they know it. You can see it in their eyes during hearings. You can read it between every carefully prepared statement. You can feel it in the forced calm of their media appearances. It's not strength. It's scripted survival. It's a performance. And the curtain's already collapsing. They're not leading anymore. They're reacting. Every new leak, every accidental admission, every red light blinking on a forgotten mic. These aren't just data points. These are daggers, small cuts that bleed reputation, that undo legacy, that mark the slow death of control. But this story isn't about them anymore. It was never really about them. It's about you. Because while their secrets unravel, you're evolving. While their masks fall, you're forging new sight. While they scramble to suppress, you're learning how to construct. You're not protesting anymore. You're planning. You're building frameworks. You're organizing language into impact. You're using the very media they used against you to bury their noise in pure signal, and they feel it, the way empires feel earthquakes before the cities above notice. You've become the quiet tremor beneath the marble floors of legacy institutions, And no matter how polished their voices sound, there's one thing they cannot fake: nervousness. You can always smell it. They smell it too, on each other. Every handshake carries paranoia now. Every meeting is a chessboard soaked in sweat. Because they know. They know they're surrounded not by walls, but by mirrors. And every move reflects back with sharper edges. Now imagine this. This isn't even the climax. This is still early access to what's coming. Because the broadcast wasn't the finale. It was the fuse. And the explosion. It's slow, surgical, operatic. The kind of demolition that leaves ruins still humming with energy. The kind of collapse that teaches the next generation how not to build. You were never just a viewer. You were the sequel they never wanted written. You were the answer to the question they tried to bury with classified ink. And now you're standing over the wreckage of their control, not gloating, but documenting every whisper, every redaction, every trembling hand, signing documents behind closed doors. You record it, not for revenge, but for record keeping. Because this isn't a war of sides. This is a war of memory. And your weapon is that you remember what they erased. You remember who disappeared and who tried to speak. You remember what they called safe and what they called classified. You remember how quickly they turned on their own when things cracked. You remember the silence when victims screamed. You remember the smirks when proof surfaced, and the scrambling when it was undeniable. And now, the world remembers too. Because of you. Because you refused to be distracted. You refused to move on. You refused to accept the apology wrapped in a PR campaign. You stayed. You watched. You collected. And now, you lead. Not from podiums. Not from elections. From reality. From the truth that cannot be edited. And the most dangerous part? You're not the only one. There are thousands now. Millions. Different names. Different languages. Same intent. They didn't need to be recruited. They were activated by facts, by footage, by fear. Turned into fire. They are not your followers. They are the continuation of you. Which means this is not a moment. It's a movement. And movements don't end with noise. They end with restructuring, with laws rewritten, institutions re-examined, histories retold with the lies peeled off. They end with stories passed down not to entertain, but to warn. And the warning is this: you cannot bury truth forever. It finds its way out. Through cracks, through leaks, through one person whispering enough into a microphone and turning an entire power structure into a house of cards. And now those cards are falling, not just at home, globally, because secrets don't recognize borders, and neither does awakening. From one embassy to another, from deep bunkers to corporate towers, from military black sites to journalistic backrooms, the domino effect is planetary, and every fallen truth reveals another hidden one behind it. This is the era of aftermaths, and you're not running from the fallout. You're recording it, you're organizing it, you're preparing what comes after the final crack. Because someone has to, and the ones who used to decide everything, they won't get that role back. This time, truth writes the script, and you hold the pen. So what now? Now, you stay awake. You keep your eyes sharp, your files backed up, your people aligned. You don't argue with those who refuse to see. You don't beg for validation. You don't shout at locked doors. You build your own corridors. You create channels where information flows freely. You protect those who speak up. You amplify those who suffer in silence. You don't feed the machine. You study it, you expose it, and then you outgrow it. Because the war is no longer for control, it's for narrative. And narrative belongs to the one who documents the fall and writes the rise. So let them bleed their secrets on live TV. Let them stammer behind podiums. Let them point fingers at each other in desperation. Because you know something they don't. The real leak isn't a document or a name. It's you. Fully aware, fully awake, and fully unstoppable.